Welcome to But Jesus Drank Wine.
And other stories that kept us stuck. I'm Mead.
And I'm Christy.
And in this podcast, we'll explore the stories that kept us, stuck, wanting to drink and not wanting to drink all at the same time.
Join us as we show you that freedom from alcohol does not have to mean a life sentence of misery and missing out,
but actually means living an authentic life full of peace, joy, and purpose.
Hello, my beautiful friend. We are really excited to have Kori Leigh in the podcast studio today. After hitting what she calls her rock bottom almost 8 years ago to the date with her mental health and struggling with alcohol, Kori has gotten sober, surrendered her life to God, and has a daughter who has never seen her drink. So cool. She has a podcast and it's globally ranked, and she's built so many incredible, successful businesses. Kori's primary purpose is to carry the message of hope and recovery to others who struggle and to inspire the world to remember that God uses our mess as his message. And babe, this conversation, we just recorded it. And so now I'm coming back and doing this intro. And this is the very first time that we have been able to have an open, honest conversation with a Christian woman who has come from finding freedom from alcohol through the 12 steps. And so we talk a lot on this podcast about how you don't need to use the label alcoholic. You don't have to go to meetings for the rest of your life. You don't have to count days. There is more than one way to find freedom from alcohol. And so I'm just so blown away by Kori's just honesty and vulnerability and willingness to chat with us as three women who love Jesus and have found freedom from the drinking cycle. And if you get one thing, and you're going to get so much from this episode because it's such a great episode, I just want to remind you that we have so much more in common. We are Christian women and we are struggling to let go of alcohol. We have so much more in common than we do not in common. And so coming together and being able to have this conversation, you're going to hear Kori's beautiful story and listen to the end, because I asked all the questions that I've always wanted to ask. And so please listen and enjoy. And yeah, enough of me. Here's the episode. Hello, my beautiful friend. Happy Monday. We are so excited to have our new friend, Kori Leigh, in the pod house today. How are you, babe?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
This is a mic swap, right? So I just got to do your podcast, which was so fun. So I got to know you and you got to hear my story, but I haven't really heard yours the whole way through yet. So we're just so blessed to have you and hear your story and like dive into all the nitty-gritty of it. And one of the things that I really took away from when you and I chatted was, it doesn't matter the semantics and it doesn't really matter kind of the labels or anything like that. We have so much more in common than not in common. And I think maybe that's because we're coming from a place of being Christian gals and putting God first in all of this. But just because some of the language that we use is different, it doesn't mean that we're basically not saying a lot of the same thing. And so I'm just so glad you're here. So where do you want to start? Do you want to take us all the way back? Maybe it would help to talk about like what your drinking looked like before you realized that there was a bottom.
I talk a lot about this concept of rock bottom, and you and me talked about that too. And how rock bottom is not, the way that I like to define rock bottom is like it's the moment where we stop digging. Because at the end of the day, really a rock bottom is like we die. That's a real rock bottom. And I feel like when it comes to a drinking problem, an air quote drinking problem, or an air quote rock bottom, like there's such a stigma around what it is supposed to look like. You know, a person that has a drinking problem is air quotes supposed to live under a bridge, drink from a paper bag. They should have lost everything. And there was probably like eons of interventions, and they have no friends and no job and no car and no anything. And that's not what it was like for me. Like my relationship with alcohol, according to my journal, was always troubled. Like I had an understanding in my journal that something was wrong, but my waking understanding of troubled relationship with alcohol in my conscious hours that wasn't in my journal was like I like to party. I didn't lose a job. I was in at the bottom of my addiction. It was like I was running marathons and tough mutters, and I had written a book, and I was coaching people, and I was a holistic nutritionist and a life coach. But then on the sidelines, I was work hard, play hard. And so the play hard was like blackout drinking, making horrible decisions while drinking, living this life where it was like it was a dual life. And so it didn't look, air quote, look the way that it was supposed to. And I'm air quoting all of this, the way it was addiction was,
Love the air quotes here, don't we, Mead?
I always have to make sure when it's a podcast, like I'm saying I'm air quoting it, or else it's going to be interpreted as if I'm like an insane person making
It happens a lot around here.
I
Yeah.
choose a lot of air quotes. Yes.
So it was just not for me. Uh, it wasn't the stereotypical bottom, and it wasn't what we think of societally as a troubled relationship with alcohol, and yet it was a very troubled relationship with alcohol and a troubled relationship with God and my sense of control. And I had a troubled relationship with existence, and alcohol helped me to feel like I was okay in existence, but alcohol was making it all way worse.
Yeah. 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 That is so, so good. And I feel like I resonate so much with that, right? Because it infiltrates every part of our existence, right? And so keeping it compartmentalized is not reality when it comes to when it starts to, as Mead always says, like the small opening and it just begins to take over. And so, what kind of led you to finally figuring that you should take a good look at this?
There was just so many moments like I think back a lot now about what it was like, and what was it, the chicken or the egg? Did insanity cause alcoholism, or did alcoholism cause insanity? For me, I come from a long line of alcoholics. We've got a lot of active alcoholism in our family and a lot of recovery in our family. I remember like being a child, and I just wanted off of this existence. Like, get me off of this stupid bus. I didn't sign up for this bus ride. I don't want to be part of this bus ride. And I remember praying like to a God that I had a lot of trouble with, because when I was 6, my dad died of a brain aneurysm on summer holidays. And we went on summer holidays, and then he didn't come home with us on summer holidays. And I have siblings, and for whatever reason, this loss dramatically impacted my relationship with with this reality, and it impacted like my relationship with men and my relationship with God, because how dare you and how could you, and this doesn't make any sense. And our family had just 5 years prior to that, my brother died in open heart surgery when I was 1. Like, there was just a lot of trauma. And but I was also raised in a Catholic home, and then when my mom got remarried, I was raised in a Catholic slash Baptist home, and so I did have this deeper understanding that there was a punishing God that lived in the sky, and I needed to abide by the rules, or I wouldn't go to heaven. And for what I thought as a child, that meant if I don't go to heaven, then I'm never going to see my dad again. And all of this, this at 6 years old formed how I related with the world. In this, I hate you, God. I want nothing to do with you, but I better do what you tell me to do, or I'm never going to see my dad. Like, it was so troubling. And so as a young child, I just remember feeling not safe anywhere. I felt like I would pray to God to take me out, let me go back to see my dad. Or I would, at the end of the day, he didn't seem to want that to happen. So I would like pray that aliens would abduct me, like anything. I was like a misfit on the planet. And so before I ever picked up a drink, I had a lot of coping mechanisms that were unhealthy, like I rage and disassociation, eating issues and gym issues, like any form of self-sabotage, you name it, I was going to be doing it. And then when I found alcohol, I liked the effects it produced. Like, I liked to party. I liked drinking. I liked being able to air quote drink people under the table. I thought that was like such a cool like talent that I had. I did not know that this was alcoholism. And so it was, but the thing with me was like it was Russian roulette. It was not every time was chaos. It lots of the time it was not chaos. And but it progressed and it progressed. And then in so to lead up to where it got bad was I didn't even start drinking until I was 23, traveling Australia. Like I was a good kid. And but I was a good kid that had no self-worth and a lot of self-hatred, and I couldn't find my place anywhere, not at home, not at dance, not anywhere. And so I just felt other than. And I hear this a lot with people with troubled relationship with alcohol, and specifically with alcoholics. Like there's just a deep sense of loneliness, like a plaguing sense of loneliness. And so then I naturally attracted horrific relationships, like abusive, narcissistic. I grew up in a narcissistic home. And so there was this period of darkness for me, which I think now looking back was like the darkest before the dawn, where I remember I came home from Australia and New Zealand, and I remember sitting in an empty bathtub with my clothes on. And I said, you know what, God, I'm done with you. This is ridiculous. I hate you. You do nothing for me. I'm taking my control back. Like you are a waste of my time. And I look back now and I can see that there was like, I just think darkness came in. And at that time, I thought it was, just like depression and anxiety. I do wonder now, though, how much it was something darker, like Satan, like darkness. And even though I didn't believe in that at the time, and then I attracted a really bad relationship that was physically violent and emotionally violent, and it just all spiraled completely out of control. And I was drinking and doing drugs and self harming and like losing my car and blacking out, but also running marathons and trying to build a business and struggling with relationships. And then I got married to a different guy. And then, like, that's when it really, I started to question my relationship with alcohol. Like, it just, the fun was not there anymore, and but the oblivion always was, which the oblivion was a friend of mine. I liked the effect that alcohol produced when it let me party, and I liked oblivion. I wanted out. And so I lived in purgatory hell on earth, and but nobody could tell, like because I didn't live under a bridge, and I couldn't tell because I didn't live under a bridge. In that final year of drinking, I'm a holistic nutritionist by trade. And so I was like a good holistic nutritionist who was going to do an elimination diet and just see how this thing affected my life. And because the final year I was blackout drinking and throwing up no matter what I drank. Like one drink I was projectile vomiting. And so I thought I had an allergy to alcohol, which turns out that's half of what I do have. And I did 56 days with no alcohol, and then there was 5 days where I added it back in on purpose because I was doing an elimination diet. And the the insanity was there, like the craving, the obsession, and then it got really dark on that. And then I hit bottom, and my bottom for me was like there was a moment of clarity and a voice that was not my voice. I will never forget. It was on December 22nd, 2016. And this voice said, it's going to make me cry. This voice said, like, you need help. Like, you have met your match. And I'm so, I was too hungover the next day to be sober. I had, you know, detoxing from alcohol is extremely dangerous, but I was not an alcoholic, so like it surely couldn't have been a problem. But I was too hungover, and the only way that I could cope was to drink. Like that is how I could function. And so I drank. That was December 22nd, and my final drink was on December 26th, 2016. And my first day of sobriety was the 27th. It was just marked by absolute desperation to just not feel the way that I felt anymore.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, babe. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and open. I mean, I know how vulnerable and open you are because I'm obsessed with your Instagram, but I just love that you shared that, and I can so relate when you said the oblivion thing. I remember that, like, when my mom died, I was in a hotel in LA visiting my dad, and I had left the kids and Chris in London, and I was so drunk, and I was just like, "If I jumped, like, would anybody the maybe the kids would care." Like, that was my thought, and I just instead, I was like, "I just wanna not feel this," and so it was more drinking and more drinking, and so I know that your words are gonna just, yeah, help so many gals, and so I appreciate you sharing. Um, Me, do you wanna add to anything or
Yeah, just I second everything you said. And then I also, I love that you named like a troubled relationship with existence.
yeah,
I think that's where alcohol can be so seductive because it does provide that anesthetic effect. It does numb. I mean, that's what it does. And so if there is that like underlying, and that could look different for everybody, but I not for the same reasons as you and your story. And there's so much trauma and so much grief there. I mean, it makes sense. And also it's so relatable that that seduction that comes where you get the relief and then it just keeps feeding itself. It's also really beautiful how you had that divine encounter that I mean, wow. I didn't have a traditional rock bottom. I didn't like you said, I didn't look like that person that I thought. And so that kept me stuck for a long time. And yet in the Lord's kindness, I had a moment where it was like, wait a minute, I'm not alone in this. And something needs to change. And also I don't have to do this by myself. Is that kind of the presence? Because you talked about the like loneliness as well. Is that kind of what you felt from that point on that you weren't alone in this? Is that when it kind of shifted for you with God, or did that come later?
So for me, I call it alcoholic loneliness. And it's like there is a difference between aloneness and alcoholic loneliness for me. And alcoholic loneliness is this like self obsessed, I'm so alone, me, depressed me, control me. Like, it really revolves around self. And for me, when I hit my bottom, and decided I'd really just, but for the grace of God, there go did I decide this? I don't think so. When I got lucky enough that my feet were smarter than my head and I got into the rooms of recovery and I started not drinking and working rigorously, it was because I had the god, like I had the gift of desperation. It was not at that time God, though that's how God worked for me. And so for the first year of recovery, when I 111 days into getting sober, my husband at the time never came home. He just called me up and he was like, I'm not coming home. And then he just proceeded to not come home. And it was bizarre. And I look back now and he had a drug addiction that I didn't even know he had. It was like there was so much unmanageability. But because I was now sober and I had all this other grief inside of me that I was no longer in abusive relationships or self-harming or drinking or doing drugs or all these other things that I had always done. It was like me and grief was so big. And so for me, that first year of recovery was grief was my higher power. It was bigger than me. I could not control it. I knew that it had the capacity to kill me. I genuinely was like, is my heart going to stop beating? My first year of recovery was the first time I had sober suicidal ideations. It was insane because I had the same feeling in active addiction where I wanted to jump, but this was more subtle. It was like just a real desperation. And I hear people sometimes talk about the pink cloud that they feel better and more clarity. And that was not my experience. My experience in sobriety was that it got way worse before it got better. My life burnt to the ground, relationships burnt to the ground. It got really, really hard. I work a 12-step way of sobriety. And so I learned how to take these steps, like one, not only just the 12 steps, but like one next indicated step at a time and suit up and show up. And it doesn't matter if I believe it. And it doesn't matter if I'm mad at God. And it doesn't matter what my philosophical ideas on life and everything is. It's like, Kori, you got to learn to play life on life's terms. Like, you got to learn to play this game of life. Like, this is where you are at. And over time, a lot of time, fake faith started to be replaced with real faith. And with hindsight, I was able to look back and see, wow, God was playing chess in my life. And now, 8 years later, I would say that I have made a full circle back to my Christian roots, but that took me a long time. And I'm so grateful that in the modality of sobriety and recovery, I was never pressured to do it any certain way. And that I didn't, it was okay that I hated God. That was okay. And God was fine with that too. God's like, it's fine. That's fine. You can hate me all you want. I'm going to be here. We're going to walk this journey and I'm going to prove it and you're going to prove it. And we're going to rekindle at the end. But I'm grateful for that. And I think that's a big part of the message that I love to bring to the table is like, our unholy, ungodly behavior isn't enough for God to kick us out, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. I love that. I love that so, so much. And when you were just speaking and talking about the timing of everything and the way that God was with you, and I just remember when we were chatting earlier last week or whenever it was about the fact that kids weren't around during this time and how I mean, how gracious of our God that that was not something that you had to like worry about, right? Like that gets to come now and the beautiful relationships you have now with them. But the fact that kids weren't around when you were doing this and your husband was also battling with this, I mean, thank God.
Yeah, it's crazy because I'm married to a different person who doesn't have a troubled relationship, and he's never seen me drink, and my daughter has never seen me drink, and like I really look back at so before I even got sober, but in 8 years of like every single day non-negotiable work on my recovery, I had I'm now on my 15th year of therapy. So like I look at the way that God has played chess, and God probably was looking at me like, you have no business having a child. Like you gotta wait. Like you having a child now, I wouldn't have I I think about it this way. Like I always imagine that God's trying to hand out this like a baton of generational healing. Like who's going to take it? Who's going to take it? And for multiple generations, it's like there's women that have been like pass, 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 and for some reason, unbeknownst to me, and sometimes I wonder, I'm mad at my own soul, but my soul was like, you know what? I'll take the baton. I'm going to do the work. And my soul just keeps doing the work, and I find it honestly so annoying at times. But because something inside of me, and I'm really careful for a long time I thought I did this because like I'm so disciplined and but it's God that did this through me. My meat sack has showed up and God did a whole bunch of work that has enabled Flora, my daughter. She's not in a dysfunctional family now. Like she's not witnessing narcissistic dynamics, alcoholic depression, blackouts, insane family gatherings, like the way that I grew up, she's it's completely a new path. And I think that I'm one of the first in many women in our generational line that is not in this dysfunction now.
I love that visual of the baton. That's so good, babe. That is so, so good.
I think that's something that I have learned how kind and how gracious God is that He is in the business of helping us tell a new story. And and the new story that He has written for you, for your daughter, for Flora. My gosh, that is just like I kind of don't even know what to do with that. It makes me just in awe of how great He is. It's amazing.
I think there's something too to be said on the romanticization of a new story. And like how it's trendy to be a generational pattern breaker, like I'm air quoting that.
Yes.
There is a reality to it that is extraordinarily painful. Like
Yes.
I don't I'm estranged from my birth family. Flora doesn't have her grandparents from that side. She won't unless I'm open to God's healing in God's way, but as it stands right now, she's not we don't participate like with her cousins, and there is an element to this that is extraordinarily lonely and alone. Like and it is worth it for me. I can see how generations down this really, really matters. But I think that it's to what you just said around God's graciousness around writing a new story. And it's like also his guidance and our ability to plug into his strength as we're writing a new story, because it's writing, like we didn't write it a new story, the
Yeah.
written happened later, but it's the writing. And the ing is like, the ing of it is, it's an everyday choice.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, 100%. I just have Sherry from She Surrenders in my head right now when she said, "Yeah, I surrendered, but I had to surrender and then I had to do the work," right? And it is hard in the beginning, and we want to like love and encourage all the gals listening, and so but we also don't want to sugarcoat it, right? And it is a lot of work and it is hard, and breaking generational patterns is really really hard, but it is so incredibly worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I think that this is so important because one of the experiences that I'm having that is very like, I'm in awe. Sobriety makes me in awe. I'm green is greener. Like if anybody who's listening is a runner, when you're running and the endorphins hit, like that's sobriety. There are moments of this connection with God and like connection with feelings, the good ones and the hard ones. That is, it's so unbelievable. And I am living a life right now where if I were to have had a vision board, I'm air quoting that, when I hit rock bottom, I would have fallen so short on what God had intended for my life. It is bananas. Like the reach that I have, the success in my business that I have. I've been asked to speak in a women's prison in a couple of weeks. I'm going to do like that is insane to me. Like it's insane. And I feel like it's timely, this kind of a conversation in New Year's, New You, and blah blah blah. And it's like God's got a plan. And so the thing that makes me, I'm like a geek about sobriety because I'm getting what I was seeking for in drugs and alcohol in living a
Mhm.
sober life.
Yep.
So like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard for sure. And I got to choose this thing every day. And I got to do my prayer work and my recovery work. And I have to take this journey as if it's life or death, because for me it is. But the life side of it is like so much better than what it's like it's beyond. It is a beyond fathomable existence to be sober and let God lead the ship.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's worth it.
I knew you were going there because that is something that we always talk about. I just wanted to not want to drink. Like I just wanted that desire to be gone because I knew that my life would be better. I knew there'd be all these benefits. I just had no idea that the Lord had all of this I mean, all of this other stuff waiting for me on the other side. Like, what? Who knew? But I think something that's so important to point out too, it's like the thinking that life is hard, you know, without alcohol, but it's easy with alcohol. Or you could even, flip it around it. Like life is hard, period. It's either harder with alcohol or less hard without. And it's even less hard with God. So it's different degrees of the same thing. Whereas I think when we're stuck in that drinking cycle, we can get so kind of like trapped. And I think a lot of a lot of listeners could relate to like that trap of like, yeah, but it's going to be really hard without alcohol. Guess what, sister? If you're listening to this podcast, it's probably really hard right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, you don't have to take it from us, but just out of like curiosity, could it be a little bit easier without alcohol and then a lot easier without? I mean, with Jesus, if you're not there yet too. So yeah, I love how you painted that picture. It's so, so good. Imagine stepping into a vibrant, warm community where faith, friendship, and freedom from alcohol all come together. That's exactly what you'll experience in the But Jesus Drank Wine community.
Each week, our members gather for connection calls that feel like a breath of fresh air, a time to share, grow, and support one another.
With an encouraging leadership team, a dedicated prayer request space, and connection opportunities in every time zone, you don't have to walk this journey alone.
Plus, we bring you masterclasses with expert guests, optional book clubs and Bible studies, and so much more.
And for those ready to go even deeper, we offer a small group coaching space called The Missing Piece. With weekly recorded coaching calls, it's a supportive place for women committed to breaking free from alcohol. We're here to hold space for sober and sober curious women who love Jesus or are eager to reconnect with him. Wherever you are on your path, you'll feel seen, supported, and strengthened here. As one member described, quote, "The BJDW community is unique because there's a connection between faith and freedom from alcohol that I haven't been able to find in any other online space or through my church." Ready to join the sisterhood? Head over to butjesusdrinkWine.com/community or click the link in the show notes to learn more. We can't wait to meet you.
It's so true though. I mean, this is the thing that is like so satanic about alcohol. Is like it's so it deceives you, and it's possessive. And for me, it was like king alcohol was my king alcohol. And the problem and the thing that was so confusing about it is that it was my solution, and it did what I wanted it to do. Like it did act as a solution. But what I didn't know, and this is another thing that has been really interesting for me in my journey, is that yes, I had a problem with drinking. I couldn't not drink. And that doesn't mean that I couldn't not drink every day, but so the drinking part. But what I didn't know was before I got sober, I I sought for what was wrong with me. Is it schizophrenia? Is it bipolar? Like what is wrong with me? Why can't I breathe ever because I'm so anxious? Why am I so depressed? Why do I have multiple thoughts inside of my head that I cannot get under control? Why do I want to die all the time? And it was a year into recovery and sobriety where I hadn't had a suicidal thought. And I was like, oh my gosh. So for me, what I've come to understand is like the alcoholism. Alcohol is but a symptom. It's ism that is extra problematic. And that ism accounts for my mental issues. And when I'm connected to God and not drinking and working an active program of recovery, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideations, all of that is not present. So alcohol cured the thing. I air quote that seriously heavily, so instant, like it was instant gratification. But what I didn't know was that it was pouring gas on the fire of these symptoms and making everything way worse over the long run. Like nothing is manageable in that state.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And only by the grace of God that didn't that it that for all of us did it not get to a point where the bottom was death, right? Like we've talked about this before where you do see those people that are on the park whatever, and now I just look at them and I'm like thank you God because like it could have gotten there. So it could have gotten there because of alcohol. And yes, like you said, yeah.
Yeah, this idea of not yets. So I'm air quoting not yets as well. I think it keeps a lot of us sick for a long time because the not yet, well, I'm not on a park bench, or I'm not through the bridge, or I'm not in prison. And I had to really reconcile with my innermost self what a not yet is and what a rock bottom is. And this is why, because I had what the world would call an air quote high bottom, where I was a high functioning, which I think is bananas. Those are not words I use anymore. That high functioning is not wanting to die. If our first thought is let me drink or kill myself, that's not high functioning. Like even if I am running a marathon, that's not a high functioning way of living. But so in the reconciliation of the air quote not yet, and even in being asked to speak at a prison in a couple of weeks, and I'm like, what do I have to offer women in a prison? And I think about the number of times that, and I will say this on a podcast like this, where I woke up in the morning and I don't know where my car is. And I don't know where my car is because I drove it in a blackout. So, what is the difference between the person who crashed and killed somebody in a blackout and me? A fated path, God's grace? I don't know. But it's not because I wasn't doing those things. Or we talk like you see the horrid drugs that are on the streets right now. The number of times I did drugs at a nightclub and I didn't know what I was taking. How did I get lucky enough that it wasn't fentanyl or it wasn't heroin or it wasn't something that was highly, that was but for the grace of God? So it's like I feel like for me, a lot of this has been reconciling the high bottom, low bottom story. And it's not a high bottom, low bottom story for me. It's a I got lucky.
Yeah.
Like God interrupted my path so profoundly. I can't even begin to question it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like you touched on something that I really related to, and I felt it too, where it was you're almost like feeling just totally depressed, dead inside, all the things because of what alcohol is doing to you. But then you're presenting this persona to the world of the holistic nutritionist, marathon runner, beautiful, all the things. And there is a real loneliness, right? And a real disconnect and a real pain when you're living in that like totally inauthentic, totally, showing fake facade. And that is what brought me to like my March
Mhm.
9th moment where I was just like, well, here I am talking about Harry and Meghan getting married at Windsor Castle, and don't I look great on Sky News? But I literally am so depressed and it's not real. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that felt?
Yeah, for me, it was like, so I have come to, at least at this point in my journey, understand that one of the markings of my alcoholism was denial. Like I didn't even know I was lying to myself, like just complete delusion. And so it didn't even necessarily for a long time feel like a double life. It
Mhm.
felt like I was work hard, play hard. It felt like I was just doing these two areas really, really well. I was running marathons really, really well. And I was the life of the party really, really well. And I remember one day, this memory is coming up as we're talking. I was teaching a boot camp and I got to boot camp and I was partying the night before. And I was like all of a sudden so sick. And I saw my clients and I just drove out of the parking lot. I didn't even say anything. And I went home and I projectile vomited everywhere. And I had a genuine story that I believed myself that it was like the Panago pizza from the night before. And it was not the Panago pizza. It's called alcohol poisoning. It's called alcoholism, Corey. So it was like, but when it started to crack the work hard, play hard, I couldn't do both anymore. I couldn't do the work hard parts. And the play hard part was betraying me. It was like not doing what it had always done. Yeah, I'd always blacked out, like, but that was just cute and fun, as what I thought. But then it started getting weird and dark and darker and darker and a lot more unmanageable. And like I couldn't get drunk and then show up the next day and run a marathon like I used to have been able to do. And so then it got really confusing because I was like, my identity was up for question. I was like, is it alcohol? Is it bipolar? Like what is it? Am I possessed? I was so perplexed. I already didn't trust God also. So like what the fabric of reality is already something I don't trust. And so it was like, yeah, but then at the end, I started really seeing that there was this double life and it was incredibly lonely. Like it's incredibly lonely to
Yeah.
run a tough mutter so hungover that you want to throw up everywhere. That's a lonely experience. Like it's like
I don't know that one, but I've not run a mutter or whatever that is. But it does not sound like anything I would ever do.
How about just
But
like we'll pick up?
yeah. Yeah. But yes, you're exact. It's like it's the loneliness of the double life. And then you think there must be something wrong with me
yeah.
because I'm having these thoughts or I'm living this double life and this is not right. And I wonder if it's that, like it's in that we all like that is where we meet God and he pulls us out in his grace and says, this is not what I have for you. This is not how I created you to be. And so it's not working because you're not meant to be living like this.
Agree.
Yeah.
And I think that the gift of it is like when it gets so bad that we come, this is like how I just describe that rock bottom idea is like we just get desperate enough that we stop doing this thing, like whatever that means. I
Yeah.
mean, I know a lot of people who have some insane stories with addiction, and it was not these crazy things we've done out there that was the rock bottom moment that the world would think. It's like when we concede with our innermost self that something is not right anymore. We are in
Yeah.
too much pain to carry on And I feel like there's a Richard Rohr has an amazing book called Breathing Underwater, and he talks about Christianity and the 12 steps. It's so beautiful. But he talks about like the nature of human beings is we're going to go on our own octane until our octane won't carry us any longer. And then we've got to plug into a greater source. But because of the nature of most of us humans, that octane, we're not going to plug into it because we're like, I want to just like get better. It's because we got so bad that
Yeah.
we found our own way and our own will is not working. And so, and then God, I feel like for me anyway, it was like God was just there waiting. Like I knew you were coming. You were coming home.
I can so relate to that, because even though I didn't have what I would call a rock bottom at all, it's not what I would say, because my idea of what a rock bottom is not the mom who is just maybe over drinking a little bit on the weekends, and maybe, depending on your definition of over drinking. Here's the deal. That was also something that kept me stuck, because over drinking is subjective. Like, what is over drinking even? But that moment of pain, like you're speaking to, like when my 4-year-old, when I went to tuck her in and smuggle her with kisses, like I always smother her with kisses, not smuggle her, but smother her with kisses like I normally did. And she's like, "Ooh, mom, no kisses tonight. Your breath stinks like wine." And it was that the pain of that moment. I mean, at first I got really defensive and not nice, but like when it really set in, it was the pain of that moment that my 4-year-old is telling me I can't kiss her. She can clearly identify the smell of wine on my breath. And how long has she been wanting to say no?
Mhm.
And yet I've been doing this, and it's that pain. So that doesn't look like a rock bottom. I was a success in all other measures of my life, perfectly put together and successful. But here's my baby saying, "No, mom, like no kisses because your breath smells like wine." That pain was such a gift. And it was of God, I know, because it's what led me back to him from the freedom. Not that this is about my story at all, but I just so relate. I love what you're saying about how the rock bottoms, we don't have to stay in this like construct of like what rock bottom is and what language we use and what method we do, how you kicked it off, Christy. It's like we all have opportunity to get curious about, are we living into what God created us to live into, and what is getting in the way. And if it's alcohol, like, okay, let's do something about it. And that's a gift. Anyway, a tangent over, but
No, that was, I think it's such an important conversation because a bottom is the moment we stop digging. Something has created something that's painful enough, whether we land in prison or our daughters won't kiss us. It's painful enough that our soul aches, and we
yeah.
know it's got to be different. And this is like where, I believe a lot of us, where God is like, wake up, stop doing this, like, come back home. This is you're being insane right now. And these moments, like there's so many acronyms for God that I love, and gift of desperation is one of them. We're desperate to not feel that way. Like there's a lot, and one of the sayings that I've learned in recovery that I love and that I find so helpful, and especially in a conversation like this, not our conversation, but like the world and our relationships with our inner sabotage, is to practice finding the similarities and not the differences.
Yeah.
Our stories will always be different, but the way we feel is exactly the same.
Mhm.
That, especially in a conversation where we have a troubled relationship with alcohol, or we identify as alcoholic, or we did 12 step or whatever, none of it matters. What matters is to start seeing that there is a similarity, that we don't have to feel so crappy, that there is actually an insanely promising life. And it doesn't matter that we can or cannot see it. It exists, and God will bring us there. But we have to get out of our own way.
Mhm.
Yes. Amen. Yeah.
Yeah. I have wanted to have somebody on this podcast that did the 12 steps and all that, and like have a real good honest conversation about it without like, because we have different semantics and we coach differently. I have found that there's a lot of resistance to even talking about the fact that like maybe there are other ways other than 12 steps. And so I have been desperate to get a Christian gal on here to talk to us openly as much as you want to about it. Tell me about like the label alcoholic and how it serves you, and because a lot of our listeners and me and I included, like that was not something that we like related to. We felt like now we have freedom and therefore like we don't have to carry that label around anymore. But I want to know from you, like how is that serving you and how is it empowering you?
I love this question because I get this a lot where people are like, stop calling yourself an alcoholic. It's an I am statement and blah, blah, blah. Or people just asking, like, why at the beginning of a meeting, like, I do see it in my content. Hi, I'm Kori, I'm an alcoholic. Like, I say it literally all the time. And I for me, the definition of alcoholism and me being an alcoholic is a twofold situation. I have an obsession of the mind and an allergy of the body. It means when I put alcohol in my body, I'm going to crave more of it and I'm going to obsess over it. There's a huge spiritual component of it as well. But my body, as an alcoholic, I do not digest alcohol normally, and it is not safe for me to ever drink it again. And so for me, it's like, I look at it in a fairly neutral way in the sense of like, I also don't do well on gluten. And when I say I am gluten intolerant, that is not an I am statement. It is I don't process gluten normally. And so I just don't eat it. And it's the same with alcoholism. Alcoholic for me is an extremely freeing label, if you will, because it reminds me how my physiology is in relationship to alcohol. I can't drink it 'cause I want more of it. One is too many and a thousand is not enough. And it it wasn't a word that I resonated with until I learned a lot about this particular philosophy on alcoholism.
So interesting. I'm so glad you asked that question because yeah, like that makes so much sense to me.
Nobody else
Wait
can
a
have this
minute.
conversation with us without
Yeah.
fighting us. So I'm glad we get to do it. And so by that definition, then isn't that pretty much anybody that drinks, right? Because anybody that drinks enough alcohol is going to crave it, right? So
Well,
it's my problem, not my problem, but my point is like it's the alcohol that's the thing, right? It's the alcohol that's the thing that's going to get us hooked. And of course, like we're going to crave it because, as you so beautifully put it, like our physiology, that's how we respond because of the way that it hijacks our dopamine and the way that it screws with our prefrontal cortex and all the things. If you drink enough alcohol, you're going to crave it, right? And so, yeah,
We're
I just
all intolerant to it, right?
yeah,
Is that or is that different?
yeah, tell us.
I don't know. Like I think this is where it gets really gray zoned, and that um alcoholism, the label of it is it's self-diagnosed. I mean, the medical community hasn't come far enough that we could like find the gene of what it is. And so I feel like it's so personal. And so we have to
Yeah.
find, I think words really matter too, that we have to find the path in which gives us the freedom. And so if that is saying I have a troubled relationship with alcohol, then by all means. If that,
Yeah.
for me, it's I am an alcoholic through, and that's never going to change. And the thing that's crazy is like when the more I've learned and I've learned about the ism underneath the alcoholism, these the spiritual void for me and the level of obsession, it shows up all over the place. So like a lot of addicts, like recovering addicts, you'll see there is a breed to these people. And I am one of these people where I can put anything underneath the umbrella of like obsession. And so, not that it's like addiction transference, because I don't feel like I'm in a place of like, I've moved one vice to another vice. I've done a lot of work around that. But it is beyond just the alcohol. The ism exists all over the place for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we were going to, and we are going to still record an episode about like when sobriety kind of becomes the idol, right? And so when like that becomes the main thing, just how something else can like take the place of who we're supposed to be putting first, right? Like I was writing out my notes for this other episode and I was thinking, okay, the thing that I'm actually, obsessing about and probably is taking too much of my time, money, space, thoughts, all the things right now is work. And so that's something, and that's not a bad thing, right? Work in and of itself, like this ministry that Mead and I are trying to build is not a bad thing. But if it takes the place of God being the first person and thing in my life, then is it an ism? And so yeah. And so I don't know.
No, no, you're right. And I think this is where like intentionality matters.
Yeah.
When we're not prioritizing things in the right way, or we're doing things to escape something, even if it's subtle, it's not a bad thing. Like you said, building a business is not a bad thing. But when there is like that, like there's a bit of a vice inside of there, a bit of escapism, or where God's not the priority anymore. Like we can look at that and say, yeah, the intention is a bit off here. I'm a bit more selfish than I should be, or I'm not prioritizing God, or I'm escaping, or whatever the thing is. Like it comes down in these things, I think, with what is our true and honest intentionality.
Mhm.
Which reminds me of what I just got off with the community call. What we kind of really talked about today is it's that turn to curiosity. It's like noticing that eat like that you just it's noticing that rub and pausing and getting curious about it. Like, oh, okay, has this taken the place? I know I didn't have words for it at the time, but I can very clearly see where wine had taken up that spot that was only meant for God and on my heart, like the throne of my heart. And it took, getting free and figuring all of that out to see that. But I can see where that wasn't the first thing that ever took the place of God. There have been things before that, and there have been things after that that constantly are competing for that spot. I have Dr. Kurt Thompson, MD's voice in my head where he's, what the Bible calls false idols. Like our modern day term for that is just like addiction. Like we're all addicted to something, and I don't mean that to be desensitive, to not be sensitive to people that
Right.
are addicts, but that's the way our brains kind of work. And so, yeah, so it's just interesting to be able to like have this conversation so that it's not something where we're stuck in our stories about like what this has to look like or not look like, or what it needs to be or what it doesn't need to be. I think we're all kind of saying the same thing where it's paying attention, being intentional and attentional, and then being curious is what ultimately, yeah, with by God's grace is what brings us to any, point of being able to overcome and find freedom.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to somebody in a recovery meeting the other day talk about these little things that happen. When it's big, it's alcohol. When it's little, it's like, oh, a little bit extra work, or like a little bit
Yeah.
more schooling, or whatever, shopping or relation. Like there's a million ways. And we are addicts. Like Russell Brand has his book called Recovery. And
Yes.
so good. It's 12-step oriented. But it's on, we're all addicts. Like we're addicted at the Richard Rohr talks about this too. We're at the fundamental level, we're addicted to our thinking. So like sometimes I think we're lucky when we have a troubled relationship with alcohol because it becomes obvious and then we start getting curious. When we don't have that troubled relationship or alcoholism, it remains subtle and there's not a problem, but there is a problem. And the when we're in these vices and subtle forms of escapism, it's like our soul is craving a sense of being filled, and the only thing that can fill our
Mhm.
soul is God.
Mhm.
So
The
like
one who created it. Yep.
exactly, we have to get brave enough to sit in the abyss of discomfort, where we
Yes.
sit in uncomfortable feelings, where we sit in the unmet dreams, the unmet needs, the pain of being human, and
Yes.
God hug us, nurture us, tend to us. Like just let that be enough.
Mhm.
Yes, so good. That's just what we exactly you just talked about in the community today. One of the girls said, "We got to sit in the suck. You just got to sit in the suck sometimes because it will move past you. Is when we start resisting and we fight against it, and then that's when it becomes unbearable, and then we hit whatever escape button it is for us, like alcohol. You like in a sense, we are the lucky ones because you can point to it. Whereas so many other people are struggling, like Amazon Prime. I'm not, pointing fingers, but like, there are other things. So yeah, it's so, so good. It is our superpower, is what I say. Like, I mean, the fact that we could find freedom from this and then now have this awareness that other things can then become that, and the curiosity that comes along with being able to do this makes life so much better. It's still hard, but it's so much better. That technicolor world, the green and the and like all like so good.
It is our superpower. And I do believe this may or may not land with people, but I do believe that in a sense we're the chosen ones. Like this, to get out of a troubled relationship with alcohol, stats are not in our favor, whether we identify as alcoholic or not. Stats are we keep drinking. Stats are the generational curse carries on. Like it is very rare to break these patterns. And then to continue the ing of the changing of the story, like that,
Mhm.
I just take that as, but for the grace of God, there go I.
Yeah.
Why did I get lucky enough that I get to do this work? The very few percentage of people, like it's more and more, but it's still, we're not the majority. Like we are not the majority.
Mhm.
Is there to stay stuck and to stay in delusion and denial and pain and victimhood and all the things. That's just easier, short term, easier.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good, babe. I love that so much. Do you feel like there's, and tell me if I'm just making all this up, but I have felt that there's a resistance from people in the 12 steps, but that there it's almost like point being is like this is the first time, and we've been doing this podcast for 112 episodes, that we felt like we could have like an open conversation like this with someone who has come from a 12 step, because I feel like there's a resistance to having a conversation that there might be like other ways to find freedom and healing. And so I want to know from your perspective, do you feel like that's true? And if so, why?
No, I think I fundamentally believe that there are many paths to all things. Like, and I get it, the Christian community gets mad at me for this one too, because I don't believe that there's one way to God. I believe that there are many ways to God, many ways to wealth, many ways to health, many ways to sobriety. Like, there is, God has given us, it's like we're a gopher and there's all of these paths underneath the ground. And ultimately all paths lead to Rome. They all lead to God. But I don't think that there's just one route to anything. And I think it is a insanely naive perspective to think that there would be only one route.
Yeah.
Why do you think there's such a resistance from people in the 12 step community that there might be other options out there for them?
It's more what slides into Christy's DM,
Mhm.
you know.
Or just
Right.
in the comments. In the comments, you
In the
say
comments,
something,
yeah.
yeah, and you say something that maybe doesn't, like there's more than, for example, there's more than one way to freedom from alcohol. And yeah, lots of four-letter
Yeah.
words coming at me. And I'm just like, but why can't we just agree that there's more than one way to freedom?
Yeah, I see this in my social media as well. People I just think it's like virtue signaling and screen warriors of all different facets in all different areas who have nothing better to do than create a fight or fight with a stranger on the internet. That is like one of the philosophies that I love in recovery is like we cease fighting anything. Like
Mhm.
there's no reason to stop and fight. It doesn't represent a group of people or a way of life. It represents somebody that has nothing better to do.
Yeah, I love that. Say that again. We cease fighting anything?
Cease
Everything?
fighting.
Yeah, I love that. We always ask our guests for one tiny new action. So just something small to leave the listener with. What would you say to our beautiful gals?
Oh man, I would say women tend to hear things and then we create like a list of 400 things that we're just going to change. Like we're going to be like, okay, I'm going to drink water and then I'm going to get sober. I'm going to do all these things. I would say pick one thing on your list, pick the low hanging fruit, one of the easiest things that you can do, and then develop the discipline not to negotiate with yourself and do
Mhm.
that and do it until it becomes a habit and then pick another thing. But start simple, Master not negotiating with yourself on one thing.
Yeah, that's so good. And that is such a timely, good action for the new year. I have had literally 2 one-on-one clients today and last night where it's the new year. So here is my laundry list of things that my goals, right? I want to drink the water. I want to do the breathing exercises. I want to lose 10 pounds. Da, 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 da. And I was like, sister, let's start with small, winnable actions. The good news is that removing alcohol, like, even though it takes work, can accomplish so many other things when when it has to do with our health and wellness, physical and mental. So, yeah, I love that so much.
Yeah, I think that that would be the other piece is like if when we're living a sober life and we feel unaccomplished and like we haven't done the things at the end of the day, I think it's so important that we let just not drinking for the day be enough. If
Yeah.
we just drink for the day, we are winning. God will do the rest.
Yes. So good. Thanks, babe. You're the best. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. You can find all of our episodes at butjesusdrankwine.com and be sure to follow us over on Instagram, Love Life Sober, and I'm Not Sober, I'm Free.
To learn more about what we do, you can visit our websites, meethollandshirley.com and lovelifesober.com.
Take a screenshot of this podcast and share it with a friend or two.
And don't forget to subscribe to our pod so you don't have to worry about missing a single episode. And if you love what we're doing, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify.
This helps more women who are feeling stuck and alone in the overdrinking cycle find hope and encouragement.
Thanks, ladies. We so appreciate you, and we'll see you next Monday.